Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Come on up, Dan. Very happy to be here today. Sorry we're starting a little late. We had slight technical difficulties, all of which have been ironed out. So this is an event that has been organized by a lot of folk. The International Leonard Peltier Defense Committee, which is here, which we're very happy to say, and we're not expecting. And New York City Jericho, New York City Free Peltier, New York City Anarchist Black Cross, the Certain Days Calendar Committee, the ProLibertad Freedom Campaign, and the New Abolitionist Movement. So that's quite a few of us who are doing that here. And also, yes, the Free Mumia Coalition. It's been part of this as well. So I just wanted to say, we know there are a lot of things happening today. There's a women's march going on right now. There is a memorial happening right now as we speak in Philadelphia for our dear brother and freedom fighter, Russell Maroon Shoatz. That's happening today as well. Some of us would have been there if we were not being here because we knew Maroon very well. Another person like Leonard who did many, many years inside, 29 years in solitary confinement consecutively. Yes, torture. And we were finally able to bring him home so that he could spend 52 entire days in the outer world with his family and loved ones before he passed. So that is, typical of what they do to all our political prisoners, including Leonard, including everybody. So we keep that in mind. And we do have, to our opening prayer, our dear brother and friend, Lenny Foster. Lenny Foster of the Dene Nation is the former director of the Navajo Nation Corrections Project and the spiritual advisor for more than 2,000 Native American inmates in 96 state and federal prisons in the western U.S. He has co-authored legislation in New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and Colorado, allowing Native American spiritual and religious practice in prison, resulting in significant reductions in prison returns. He's a board member of the International Indian Treaty Council, a sun dancer, and member of the Native American Church. He has been with the American Indian movement since 1969 and has participated in actions including Alcatraz, Black Mesa, the Trail of Broken Treaties, Wounded Knee 1973, the Menominee Monastery occupation, Shiprock Fairchild occupation, the Longest Walk, and the Big Mountain land struggle. Lenny Foster has received many accolades and honors for his groundbreaking work with Indigenous prisoners' human rights and has testified many times at the United Nations on both Indigenous issues and political prisoner Leonard Peltier. He's also Leonard Peltier's personal friend and spiritual advisor, and Lenny will be leading us via Zoom with an opening prayer. So, thank you, Lenny Foster.
I just want to express my appreciation and respect for all of you and all the hard work that you have done to put this event together. I know it's very meaningful for our brother Leonard, and he appreciates it very much, and I appreciate it. And thank you for the invitation. I will share a blessing way ceremony or prayer with you, all of you, and for all of you and your families. So the Zenebe Yanonit Eto Ben Hitlan Clon Ashon Shitrat Yen Long. Yen Yot Adian Joe Bite Yen Ajoni. Con Koroyat Eho Ha Shada Ah now Cons. Bejon Yetata, Bejon Hikere, Bejon Hiaran, Bejon Hikara Alcon, Hineonade Combayat Elbe. Behejon nos claim, Bejon Tanane Kishin. Niganat Abianat El, Erin He Nabianat El. I don't get out Zambianat El, Yadakit Jonah El Chidian. Tradine Ben Jonan Hanat Keen, Ashonish Katian Long. The in Yot 18 Joe Biden in a zone. They conquered all Joe Patnits and they con a Hinane Kre. And yet said as in Bayat El and Handan Lau Ben Kitlan Ole. Ben Jonon T case, Ben Jononi. Nihina Nishil Yado and his Zabayat El and Handan Lado. They could all Shinain Lo Ben Ashni Dole, USP Coleman Wonders, Dab in Lado, Leonard Peltier, Ashona Shitrat in long. Aro di con Kuro so he Kaigi do Kevin Sharp do and Lamb do so visit of a car David do so didn't get the net he Kaigi Ayat eho de concert is a by hin lado le Ashona Shitrat in long. Benjono Tanane Kistole. Nigezade Yanan at Eto. Aro it had as a nestling or let your palani so they con but the Janon T case. Ashon Rishat in long. A co edi con ba in lado le the con Leonard Peltier Bindi Juana Dasto. The con leg Bouquet Yaho. The cane long agent or dato edo but manat kid or less. A turtle man ban a Chippewas, don't know how it without and then long but last long. A con could all show the bindi, who one not dust or this, a young or dust, that way young or dust a could all without jet set the sense it hot in long, they can't be shit long, said as an ebe yat eto. Ha shada na no, Bejon, he data, Bejon, he catered, Bejon, he yada. Bejon he caught it out continue nade con beato behejon the sling behejon the sling behejon the sling behejon the sling oh good
Thank you so much, Lenny. Really
thank you
appreciate it. It's great to see your face, even if it is by Zoom. We miss you here in New York. A lot of people were thinking you were coming, and we're very excited. We had to tell them you were going to be on the Zoom. So great to see you, and thank you so much for the prayer. And we will have you come. We will have you come back later for a further announcement. And I also forgot to say with something very important that has been going on is the American Indian Movement's Walk to Justice for Leonard Peltier, which has been fantastic. I mean, here's people walking more than 20 miles a day, all the way from Minneapolis, Minnesota, to Washington, D.C., right, for Leonard. And this is a beautiful, beautiful thing. You can follow it on Facebook. I've been following them every day. Just look for Walk to Justice on Facebook and follow them and share their posts and share their information, because it's very, very important that this mobilization is happening at this time to D.C. They will be arriving in D.C. on November 14th. And I'm sure they will have plenty to say in D.C. to the powers that be and the powers that need to hear them. So that's really important, and people should definitely follow them on Facebook and post that information around and share it on social media. It's really beautiful and uplifting. And Dan, please come back up here. This is my friend Dan Battaglia, who is also the International Leonard Peltier Defense Committee Secretary and member of the board. He's been doing a lot of hard work for Leonard for a long time. In fact, is planning to go and visit him soon. So give it up for Dan Battaglia, folk, doing this work for a long time.
Thank you very much, Ann, and thank you to all who are here in person with us and taking the time to be part of this event. And thank you to Jorge and our team for putting this together. And to everyone watching virtually, thank you so much for taking your time to be part of this event. My name is Dan Battaglia. I am the Secretary for the International Leonard Peltier Defense Committee, and it's a pleasure to be with you. I am known to be a talker, so I'm going to have to minimize the time I'm going to be up here to speak. But I just wanted to talk about a few things of the case that sometimes get overlooked, and also I think should really be considered when anyone's talking about Leonard Peltier's case. Leonard Peltier was indicted with 4 individuals for the murders of 2 FBI agents on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. One gentleman, whose name is Jimmy Eagle, the charges were dropped against him because they felt there was not enough of a case to bring against him, despite the fact that several people admitted that he had confessed to taking part in it. However, Dino Butler, Bob Robidoux, and Leonard Peltier were indicted and went to trial. Leonard Peltier was fighting extradition from Canada when Dino Butler and Bob Robidoux were about to go to trial. And instead of having them wait to see if Leonard Peltier would be coming back, the judge, Ed McManus, allowed the trial to go forward. and figured Leonard Peltier would be trialed when and if he was returned to the United States. During that trial, there was an incredible amount of testimony related to the period known as the Reign of Terror on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. This is a period of history that is still a very much an open wound as far as what I've seen on my visits out to Pine Ridge, and has still not healed. And it's something that we should not be proud of, and it's something that we should be educated on, where there was pretty much a civil war going on between the Oglala Sioux tribe and the traditional population of the Oglala Lakota people, who wanted to adhere to the traditional ways, preserve the language, practice the religion. And whenever they tried to challenge the norms of the Dick Wilson government — Dick Wilson, by the way, was the president of the Oglala Sioux tribe — they were met with force. And of course, this culminated with the siege of Wounded Knee in 1973 with Leonard Peltier wasn't there. And that itself garnered a whole mess load of attention. Marlon Brando, as some of you may know, refused his Oscar for the movie The Godfather so that he could take his stand with the American Indian movement at Wounded Knee. But there's a lot of stories. There are a lot of stories that come from that period that are overlooked and in some cases weren't even documented. And it's a tragedy that that happened. But one of the reasons I want to talk about this today is because this information was not allowed to be delivered to Leonard Peltier's jury during his case. It was allowed during the Dino Butler and Bob Robidoux trial, they went to trial before Leonard Peltier. Excuse me. And that set up their self-defense argument, as they were acting in self-defense during this incident and they were found not guilty. And the jury foreman of that trial had said, we would have found them guilty even if there was evidence that they actually did participate in the shootings. So they were acquitted. Unfortunately, Leonard Peltier was found guilty, and he was not allowed to present the same evidence that they presented. But you have these horrific incidents that happen. For example, one of them that I want to talk about is the Pine Ridge Airport incident. There's a wonderful attorney that was on the Wounded Knee Legal Defense Offense Committee. His name is Roger Finzel. Roger Finzel was with his aide, Ida Gordon, and other Wounded Knee Legal Defense Offense Committee lawyers traveling to Pine Ridge, preparing for the Wounded Knee trials. And this is just before the firefight in Oglala that Leonard is serving time for. And when they landed at the Pine Ridge Airport, they went about their business, did what they were going to do. But when they returned to their airplane, they found it riddled with bullets. And Dick Wilson himself, along with the goon squad, surrounded them and ordered, and I quote, "Stomp them." They beat up Roger Finzel, broke a few of his ribs, and attempted to stab him. But had it not been for Ida Gordon deflecting the knife, Roger Finzel may have been stabbed in his head from this felonious attack. And you see a lot of incidents like this that went unchecked and not investigated, nothing like that. And that's the kind of tension that had gone on that was pervading the Pine Ridge Reservation before the firefight. Now, although we can go into a lot of detail, I've started to get a lot of primary sources that are related to this time period, so they're invaluable in really understanding this story. Because the murders of the agents, tragic as it was, and of course the murder of Joe Stuntz, tragic as that was as well, okay, can never be seen as isolated incidents that just happened out of nowhere. That couldn't be further from the truth. So in any event, helping to paint a picture of that time period will really help you understand what's really going on underneath all of this case. And with that said, I want to transition a little bit over to some of the torture that the witnesses that testified against Leonard's that when they testified against him, a lot of this information did not come out or was presented to the jury. But we now know through affidavits and testimonials what was really happening. So we all know about Myrtle Pourbear, who was coerced into claiming she was Leonard Peltier's girlfriend when she had never met Leonard Peltier until she walked into the courtroom for his trial. She wound up creating a fourth affidavit outlining the abuse that she had experienced at the hands of the FBI, specifically David Price. Then you have David Little. David Little is the brother of Bo Little and a member, obviously, of the Little family. David Little was the first suspect arrested when they were investigating the deaths of the agents. And Roger Finzel, who I mentioned a few moments ago, was one of the attorneys, that was the first to go in and see him. And Roger Finzel told me over the phone that when he went in there, he could tell that this young man had been beaten, had been abused, had been tortured. And when I interviewed Bo Little before he passed away, he told me that his brother was never the same from that day forward. No prosecutions, no investigations into that or into the treatment of that witness. Now, David Little wasn't a witness at Leonard's trial, but it is a clear signal of what was going on in an effort to convict the American Indian Movement activists for the murder of the agents. Then you have Mike Anderson. Mike Anderson was under the age of 18. They called him Baby Aim. Mike Anderson was questioned without the presence of a parent or legal guardian, and he was subject to sleep deprivation, which by definition of the Geneva Conventions is considered torture. Wish Draper was threatened with egregious jail time for having an open container, because when they found him and I don't want to say took him, but when they took him as a material witness for the case, he had an open container of alcohol and they threatened him with an egregious jail time. And I was told by Bruce Ellison that he was tied to a chair and threatened that if he did not testify against Leonard Peltier, the worst would happen to him. Angie Longvisitor. Angie Longvisitor was the wife of Ivis Longvisitor and a member of the Jumping Bull family who lived on the compound where the firefight took place. She and her husband refused to testify against Leonard Peltier or any of the AIM members. My colleague Preston Randolph and I found a handwritten letter from Angie where she outlines the abuse that she had received. She was incarcerated because she refused to testify, and her husband was incarcerated. And when they were brought before a judge to see if they would change their minds, they refused. So in this letter, and finding documents like this really helped paint a picture behind the scenes of what's going on with these witnesses and what happened to them. And also, her letter was notarized by her attorney, Kenneth Tilson. Not sure if that's the right word, but he did co-sign it just as a witness. And then we have Norman Brown. Norman Brown, mind you, Norman Brown and Mike Anderson are under the age of 18. Norman Brown, his mother was allowed to be, I think, in the room next to where he was. Norman Brown is the only one who had a parent, the only one who had a parent with him when he was being questioned and interrogated by the FBI. The other minors under the age of 18 did not, nor did any of them have a lawyer represented. Norman Brown wrote a great affidavit about how the FBI told his mother that they would kill him if he did not testify against Leonard Peltier. So you see these things happening, and this is what is not presented to Leonard Peltier's jury. And had they known that, or at least most of it was not, and had they known that, the outcome may have been different. Because if these are key witnesses testifying against Leonard, and they're testifying under coercion, we all know when you torture someone, they'll say whatever they have to say for you to stop. And that's what was happening here. And if anyone would like an idea of to what happened on Pine Ridge immediately after the firefight, when the FBI descended and sent anywhere between 200 and 300 agents within a 1-week period after the firefight happened, you can read the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights report in 1975. It's outstanding. And in this document, it outlines the harsh tactics of the FBI. They were using warrantless searches, all kinds of harassment going on. And the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights had sent an observer, William Muldrow, and he wrote a report about what had been going on. The FBI wouldn't speak to him. And also, something that should be taken into consideration is, don't forget, warrantless searches, okay? That is something that we very much need to address, okay? People just going into your home without a warrant and without your permission, which happened several times, that is illegal. So, there was also a story I wanted to share with you real quick. Bruce Ellison, who is an incredible individual and has given me a lot of the documents I've collected over the years. He is still associated with the case, and I think he's the only lawyer alive who is one of Leonard's original lawyers still working the case. He told me when I interviewed him about 10 years ago that he had gone to the Jumping Bull home, which on the property where the firefight took place, to observe, and found the home riddled with bullets. They had a relative who had fought in World War II and another relative who I think passed away in Vietnam, and their pictures were quite visibly littered with bullets. he found a young child's doll that had a bullet in the pubic area. And also, according to what Bruce told me, the jumping bull home was so saturated with tear gas that they really never lived in it again. And that's quite the tragedy, of course. So all of these things that go unchecked and all of these things that aren't discussed and are not presented really don't tell you the full story. Leonard Peltier has been unjustly incarcerated for over 40 years. And when the government has admitted that they don't know who killed the agents, they're allowed to change their theory. He is now no longer principal first-degree murder. He's now an aider and abetter, which anyone will tell you is a completely different trial if you're on trial for aiding and abetting. Though the penalty is still the same, it is a completely different trial. So I had the great fortune of being with Leonard last December. He looked great. I don't know how he does it. He was joking. He was busting my chops when I got there. It was fantastic. It was nice to see him, and I hope to see him again soon. But there's a book I want to recommend to you, and the book is it's out of print because the publisher is no longer an active publisher, but it is available on Amazon.com. Leonard has always raved about probably the most famous book about this case, which is called In the Spirit of Crazy Horse by Peter Matheson. It's an excellent account, but it is about 2 inches thick. It's a fantastic book. Can't recommend it highly enough. But if you want to get a scholarly account of the trial of Leonard Peltier, I highly recommend The Trial of Leonard Peltier by Jim Messerschmidt. It's an outstanding book. It is one of the few scholarly accounts of the book that's perfectly cited, that shows you the comparisons between the Butler-Robidoux trial, which, by the way, Ed McManus said in an interview that the Peltier trial was on his docket of cases to be tried, but then it was mysteriously moved to Fargo, North Dakota, to a judge we found out was racist, Judge Paul Benson. And by the way, you have to have an order of transfer somewhere, and to date, the legal team and myself have never found that that letter of transfer, transferring the venue from Cedar Rapids to Fargo, North Dakota. You can't do that without an order of transfer, and we haven't found it. Not saying that it doesn't exist, but we have not found that yet. But Ed McManus was supposed to try Leonard Peltier, but unfortunately that did not happen. So if you go on Amazon.com, that's where I got my copy of the book. I highly recommend it because it's about 200-300 pages. It's a great read. I actually have been on the phone with Jim last month or two because I'm trying to get his book made into an audiobook as well. And it is, again, the only scholarly account that's related to the trial. But please do yourselves a favor, go out and get these books, educate yourself on this case, okay? Because if you don't, okay, then you will never understand what really is at the heart of this case, because it's an extraordinary case, like the Leonard Peltier case, which is a clear example of when we lose our rights that we hold so sacred. So I could go on and on, but I know we have a lot of other great speakers, so I would like to segue into that. Kevin's next, right? Yes. So next up, we are going to have Leonard's lead attorney, former federal judge, and I have to say, I've been working with him a lot lately. He is just a fantastic, fantastic person. Couldn't be more excited that he is spearheading our clemency efforts. So we are now going to ask Kevin to join us so he can update us on the clemency efforts. Kevin Sharp, ladies and gentlemen.
All right. Thank you, Dan. You know, it throws me a little bit. I hear the things that Dan is talking about, and I want to get to him because he's absolutely right about this. But it was one of the things that I was not necessarily planning on talking about, but he mentioned the order transferring the case from Judge McManus to Benson. And he said, you know, he hasn't been able to find it. I have never seen it. But interestingly, Judge McManus has never seen it. I saw an interview with him before he died, and he was asked about that. And he had no idea how that case was transferred. So it's part of why I understand those things is because I was a federal judge. And it's part of what pulled me into this case, right? So I came at it from a different perspective than almost everybody else involved because I didn't understand the context side, which is what Dan was talking about, right? And he's absolutely right about that. You can't understand what happened at Pine Ridge without understanding in 75, without understanding what happened at Wounded Knee in 73, and what happened leading up to that, right? What happened at Wounded Knee in 1890? You know, all of that, those things provide context for this. You can't understand, you really cannot understand Pine Ridge in 75 if you don't understand the Reign of Terror, and if you don't understand the Goon Squad, and you don't understand what was happening at that time. And I know Paul is here, and nobody can provide context the way that he can. But the context that I saw was not necessarily at the time I got involved in this case, was not the historical context. It was the judicial context, because I was appointed to the federal bench by President Obama, and those are lifetime appointments. I didn't stay, and I resigned from that position because I had issues with the criminal justice system and unfairness in that system. And I had to make a decision: was I going to stay on the bench and complain about it, which I could, or was I going to step off the bench and spend more time trying to change that system? And so I decided to step off the bench. And when I did that, one of the first things that I did, when I was on the bench, I had sentenced a young man named Chris Young, who was 23 years old, to 2 life sentences for a nonviolent drug offense. And that to me was the catalyst that led me to this real struggle with our criminal justice system. And how could this system, which was supposed to be one working toward justice, it's right there in the name, allow a kid, and I apologize to anyone who is in their early 20s, but as the old guy sitting on the bench, I looked at him as a kid, and how are we going to do this? And so when I stepped off the bench, I started working on clemency to help get Chris Young out of prison, and try and right at least that wrong, and then work on a broader issues in the criminal justice system. But as I worked on that, and Kim Kardashian got involved, it became a national story that Kim Kardashian, Van Jones, and myself met with President Trump to talk about clemency issues. And the story wasn't because I was there. The story was because Kim Kardashian was in the Oval Office. I just happened to be there. But that then led others to send me the case files for Leonard's case, and I didn't know that case. I'm not even sure if my recollection of that time was, and more likely was because of news stories about Wounded Knee, right? Because remember, I'm 12 years old at the time. That was the summer of 75 for a 12-year-old in Memphis, Tennessee. The last thing you were thinking about is what's happening in South Dakota. I mean, that couldn't be any farther away from my world. So when I sit down fresh off the federal bench to take a look at the trial of Leonard Peltier, I look at this objectively, and I start reading the transcripts, and I read the court opinion, and I read the newspaper articles, and look at the photographs. And I do that in this sterile, objective sense, as someone who has spent really a lifetime supporting and defending the Constitution, because out of high school, I joined the military, and you take an oath to support and defend the Constitution. And when I got out of the military and went to college and then law school, one of the first things you do, right, as soon as you pass the bar, is you get in front of the Supreme Court and you take an oath to support and defend the Constitution. And then I'm fortunate enough to be selected and confirmed by the U.S. Senate. It was a unanimous vote by a Republican-held Senate, right? I am as middle of the road as it comes. And again, when I take the bench, I take an oath to support and defend the Constitution. And so that's where, when I pick up the trial transcript of the United States versus Leonard Peltier, my entire mindset is, okay, everyone here has taken this oath that I have, and we're going to support and defend the Constitution. Let's see if we can't get to justice. And I kid you not, I'm on day one, and I start to see justice has little to do with what's about to happen here and what is happening here. This is about getting a conviction. And one of the things that we talked about among the judges when I was on the bench is, if a judge wants a case to come out a particular way, we can stick our thumb on the scale. And there is nothing that anyone can do about that, because the way the standard is on an appeal, a lot of these decisions are about abuse of discretion. And that is a really high hurdle for a court of appeals to overturn. So a judge can make a decision about who gets to testify or what they get to testify about, what evidence comes in. All of that, by and large, becomes an abuse of discretion standard. That's why you spend so much time, if you really care about the judicial system, making sure that the judges you select are people who are not going to stick their thumb on the scale, right? They've got to have the intellect, they've got to have the judgment, they've got to have the temperament, they've got to be fair. The primary goal has got to be obtaining justice. And so that's why you spend so much time getting the right judges. Now that has been cast aside as of late, but that's the mindset that I had when I started reading Leonard's case and I start reading the trial transcripts, and I see it on day one. And I see that on day one, decisions have been made leading up to that trial in pre-trial motions and things where somebody has already had their finger on the scale, where the scales of justice are already tipped in the government's favor. And then I get to day two, and I see that one of the jurors who's been selected admits that she is prejudiced against Indians. Those are her words, not mine. I am prejudiced against Indians. She says it, but she's allowed to stay, right? The Sixth Amendment to the Constitution says you have a right to a fair jury. And they threw it out on day two, and she stays. I think this can't be true. I mean, I turned to the back. Let me get to the end here and see if this woman is still sitting on the jury when the verdict comes in, and absolutely she is. And I see over and over again these kinds of constitutional violations. I see it in court opinions where the 10th Circuit says witnesses were intimidated, evidence was withheld. There is no dispute about this. Yet here we are, right? And Dan talked about this. This case is tried as if Leonard is the principal shooter. That's the trial. That's the case that they make, and they only have one piece of evidence. They've hidden the exculpatory evidence, and that means, right, there's evidence that's inculpatory that tends to show someone committed the offense that they are charged with, and then there's evidence that's exculpatory. That's evidence that tends to show that they are not the person who committed this crime. Now, if the government can take that exculpatory evidence and hide it, right, it kind of makes it difficult for you to put on your defense. And that's exactly what the government did. They had evidence in the form of a ballistics test, a firing pin test, that even their expert on the stand admitted that would be the gold standard for determining whether or not a particular weapon had fired a particular shell. That was the gold standard, and he said we were not able to conduct a firing pin test. But all we've got is a shell casing test that won't tell you it's the exact shell came from this weapon, but it can match a shell up with a weapon type, and that's what we have. And that was their entire argument. They argued it over and over and over. We've got the shell casing. It was found at the scene. Now, even the prosecutor admitted that type of shell casing really doesn't mean anything unless you can attach it to a particular weapon, because that shell casing would also be used by law enforcement. So you've got to have more than just the shell casing, but that's all they've got, as far as we know. And that's their argument. But years later, it comes out that this expert had lied. They had, in fact, conducted a firing pin test, and it had shown that it wasn't the weapon that they tied to Leonard. And they knew it. They knew it. And that's why they had to hide it. So now, and this is back, Dan talked about this, now they're back to, well, wait a minute, we're going to have to retry this case and give them this evidence unless we change our theory. And so what they changed their theory to was aiding and abetting. Now, Bill Kunstler and the other lawyers at the time file a motion that you've got to set this verdict aside. That's when they changed their theory to one of aiding and abetting. And that's where the assistant U.S. attorney who tried the case admits two things. One, that they don't know who shot the agents. They have no idea who shot the agents. He also admits that there are only 3 people who have ever been, that there are any witnesses that even placed there, right? So they had, their entire theory was on the second trial that Leonard, Butler, and Robideau are the only 3 people down by the car. And they admit that their evidence, even with the shell casing, and again, this is their words, not mine, is sketchy. That's the words of the prosecutor. Our evidence is sketchy. But somebody shot them, and there are only 3 people down there. And so Leonard, although we did not prove that, again, the assistant U.S. attorney says we could not prove and did not prove that Leonard shot anyone, but he was there. And so one of the judges at this hearing says, well, Mr. Crooks, who did he aid and abet? And again, I mean, so much of this is just crazy. It blows my mind. His response to that was, I don't know, maybe himself. You don't have to be a legal scholar to understand that you cannot aid and abet yourself. It is impossible. But if Mr. Crooks was unsure of that, the Department of Justice criminal trial manual tells you that you cannot aid and abet yourself, right? Because in order to aid and abet yourself, it means that you shot at someone. But he's already admitted that we know he didn't shoot. We don't know who shot them. And we have evidence that it wasn't Leonard. So even if you could aid and abet yourself, he did not aid and abet himself. So who did he aid and abet? Robideau and Butler? Can't, because they were acquitted based on self-defense. It means they did not commit a crime. But if there's nobody else there, according to the U.S. attorney, then it's one of those 3. And we know 2 of those 3 have been acquitted based on self-defense. And we know that the third one, Leonard Peltier, did not shoot anyone. It's a legal impossibility. And so these are the kind of things that blow my mind. How in 2022 are we still sitting here talking about this? How can this happen? So, you know, if that was going to be their theory, and Dan talked about this, that's so they go back to, if they're going to go with aiding and abetting. Part of the problem is, and why his defense was taken away, is because Judge Benson, right? This is the whole reason this case has to be transferred from Judge McManus. We know not how, but it ends up with Judge Benson, a former prosecutor in Fargo. No order telling us why. And we know that the FBI and the U.S. attorney met with Judge Benson before the case was transferred to him. And we know that the FBI and the U.S. attorney's office talked to Judge Benson about Leonard Peltier in this case, because it's in their notes. And it would be an improper ex parte, called an ex parte communication, if the case had been transferred to him, but it wasn't yet. So it's not ex parte. But he should have recused himself because he is now met improperly with the prosecutor, but he does not. And he tries this case, and he says, when the defense wants to put in all of this evidence about the reign of terror and about the FBI misconduct, because it goes to the elements of self-defense, he says, well, the FBI is not on trial here. Of course they are. They absolutely are on trial here, because you cannot understand what happened and why without understanding the reign of terror and without understanding the misconduct and the treatment of the local people by the BIA agents and by the FBI. That tells the entire story. Why did they need to be there in the first place? That is part of the story. You have to know that. But if your theory is truly going to be in aiding and abetting, you're going to have to allow in evidence of what happened in the first trial, which Benson does not. He doesn't allow them to tell the jury that his co-defendants were acquitted based on self-defense. But in his mind, he doesn't need to, because the theory is a principal theory, that he is the principal shooter. So it doesn't matter in his argument what happened in the first trial, because their theory is that he shot them. But as we know later, sorry, I want to make sure that I don't run over, because I want to make sure I leave plenty of time to hear Mr. Berg's story. But you have to let that evidence in, because the government's position is there were only 3 people there. And if Leonard didn't shoot him, it was one of the other 2. And if the other 2 were acquitted based on self-defense, there is no crime. And 46 years later, we sit here with Leonard Peltier in a maximum security prison at 78 years old, with a health condition that is so precarious that I worry every day. And is today the day that I'm going to get the phone call from the prison telling me that Leonard is dead, or that Leonard has been taken, to one of the hospitals an hour away. We know he has an aortic abdominal aneurysm. That's deadly. That's something that needs immediate attention. But all of that then leads to, and so when I got this case and I'm reading the transcript, the what happened is so easy. And that's what really frustrated me is, am I the only person who sees this, in the criminal justice system? This is the easy part. But then what has dragged me in really kind of sucked me in for the next 3.5 years is the why. And I go back to Paul's book, Sandra's Hands. I was just reading it again the other day to get back in and remind myself of the context, because here's the interesting thing that's happened, and a handful of people know about this, and I just have a couple of minutes, but I want to leave everybody with this, and this is what's so frustrating, and this is why I went back to Paul's book, is that the FBI's position. So a year ago, we filed our clemency petition. And part of what happens when you file a petition with the Department of Justice is that they go back and ask the stakeholders, they call them stakeholders, what does the FBI think about clemency? What does the U.S. Attorney's Office think about clemency? The Pardon Attorney's Office, if you look at the Department of Justice, it's set up into 2 sections. There's a civil section and there's a criminal section. And under the criminal section, if you're looking at an organizational chart, is the U.S. Attorney's Office, is the Bureau of Prisons, is the FBI, is the Pardon Attorney's Office. They're all in this direct reporting line up to the Assistant Attorney General and then the Attorney General. There is such a conflict of interest in deciding or recommending who gets clemency and who does not. But they ask their stakeholders, what do they think? Now, I'm not, as Leonard's attorney, and no one else on the side trying to gain clemency for Leonard is entitled to know or see what those stakeholders have to say. But oddly, some agent thought that they could supply that letter to a reporter who's been following this case and convince her that she is completely wrong about this. And so she sent this letter to me, and I am dumbfounded because the entire FBI's position is that Leonard Peltier is a cold-blooded killer who went down that hill and shot these agents. It's like, guys, you know, you abandoned that position 35 years ago when it was discovered that you withheld the evidence proving that that wasn't true. But that's their position, and they say it over and over and over again, so that even the public and the press, unless they're paying attention, lose sight of the fact that he was not convicted of shooting anyone. He was convicted of being a Native American who was there. That's what he was convicted of. And their position has been, if we say it enough times, it will be believed. And that's why we've got to keep getting the word out there that that's not true, that he didn't do it, that the Constitution matters. And that's why I'm here. That's why I want to keep talking about this case. And that's why I want to hear, you know, I love hearing from Dan and Paul and Lenny. So they all, you know, particularly Dan and Lenny, Paul and Lenny live this, and they understand it, and they've got to keep talking about it. And what's very frustrating and scary is that those voices are becoming silent. Those voices are no longer with us. And so we've got to hear them. We've got to record this and make sure that the world doesn't forget, and the world doesn't forget about Leonard Peltier. So thank you very much. I apologize for taking too much time, but thank you all for being here, and thank you all for listening and giving me time to talk about this.
Kevin Sharp, the lead attorney for Leonard Peltier. Thank you very much, Kevin. Thank you. Really quick before we bring on our next guest, if you don't mind, there's one or two points I'd like to address to our attendees and also to our viewers at home. But first, I'd like to recognize someone who's just joined our movement. It's going to be working a lot with Kevin. Talia, would you please stand? I've just met Talia for the first time, and I'm beyond excited to be working with her, and we are incredibly grateful that you are going to be assisting us. So that said, one of the points I want to address is the FBI has always maintained a very wooden position, though you do find one or two people within the Department of Justice who do change. For example, James Reynolds, who was once a prosecutor of Leonard, who is now advocating for Leonard and trying to help us get him free. But they have a very wooden position that Leonard Peltier is guilty, he's a cold-blooded murderer, and all kinds of other negative and nasty remarks towards him because they see him as the killer of two of their comrades. My question to them and to the Department of Justice is, if Leonard Peltier is so guilty, why are we making up evidence? Why are we coercing witnesses? Why are we using illegal tactics to extradite him from Canada? Why are we doing all this if Leonard Peltier is so guilty? If he's so guilty, let the evidence speak for itself. And anyone who has reviewed the evidence that has been released, and by the way, a large portion of it was not made available to Leonard Peltier's defense at trial, which is a violation of his constitutional rights. It's a Brady violation, I believe. However, if he's so guilty, why are we making up witnesses, and why are we coercing testimonies? And why are we allowing the full evidence to be heard? So just think about that, folks. Because if he's so guilty, then why did you have to make up witnesses? And why are we torturing children and not allowing at least a lawyer to be present when they're being questioned by FBI agents? Why? That's a question that's never been answered, and I'd love to answer that. There's another thing I want to bring up, and some people who are familiar with Leonard's story may know about this. In 1973, Leonard was arrested and charged with the attempted murder of a Milwaukee police officer. And then he actually went to trial for it after he was unjustly convicted in the deaths of the agents. During the trial, where he was accused of attempted murder, the girlfriend of the officer who Leonard is accused of committing attempted murder against came out and testified for Leonard, and testified that she had heard her boyfriend say that he was going to, now, forgive me, I'm not quoting it exactly, but something along the lines of this: I'm going to really help the FBI get a big one here. If anyone has any questions about Leonard Peltier being a target, that is direct proof that he was being targeted before the incident at Oglala. And mind you, he was also found not guilty of those charges, even though he had been unjustly convicted in the deaths of the agents. So that's proof positive. If you have any doubts that Leonard Peltier was not politically targeted, there's your proof. And before we bring on our next guest, I did this the last time we had an event. I think it was 2019, Ann. I really like doing this because I think we don't do it enough. And over the years, Leonard's movement has seen new faces come, and some of the old faces are still fighting for him, which is wonderful. But as Kevin and I talked about, there are victims of the Reign of Terror that are, unfortunately, will remain nameless because there were no investigations and no one valued life on the reservation, which is quite sad and obviously tragic. But I would like, even if you're home, if we could just observe a brief moment of silence to commemorate them, because they need to be remembered and not just be statistics. They are an integral part of this story. So if you can, would you please rise and we'll have a brief moment of silence? There are too many. We remember you and we love you always. Thank you, everybody. Now, the next gentleman we're going to have join us via Zoom is really someone who I consider a blessing, along with his wife, because he's just an incredible individual. His name is Paul Berg. Paul Berg was one of Leonard Peltier's chief witnesses during his parole hearing. And it was at this parole hearing where, to make a long story short, we learned that Leonard was actually recommended for parole by the examiner of the hearing and sent his recommendation to the parole board, but the parole board rejected that. And as a result, the examiner was demoted for his recommendation. This is the closest, at least to my knowledge, that we've come to getting Leonard released. But the gentleman you are about to see on the screen and his wife are two of the most heroic people in the story that I've come across. They are survivors. They live to tell their story. And it's an honor to work with him, and it's an honor to know him. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. and Mrs. Paul Berg.
Hello, we're delighted to be here and be able to share our story. Dan has asked us to talk about the Reign of Terror, about Sandra Wounded Foot, and Leonard's parole hearing in 2000. If I could just introduce us a little bit more. We came onto the reservation in what year?
71.
71. As a Bureau of Indian Affairs teacher, I was a naval veteran of the Vietnam War, military naval intelligence. And we, during the siege of Wounded Knee, second or third day of the siege, I and a tribal employee came upon two FBI agents brutalizing a Native American family. We intervened, reported it, and within 2 days, I was transferred from being a 7th and 8th grade teacher in Porcupine to being part of the FBI tactical teams. I checked with Russell Means, the people in Wounded Knee, and said, "What do I do?" And he said, "Don't ever fire your gun at anybody. Don't point it at anybody. Keep those animals from killing anybody." And we got no problem with you being there. I think what helped me with that assignment is that I've been beaten by the tribal police the year before, had my jaw broken, and it was kind of acceptable to the American Indian movement at that point. So I served with the tactical teams, and indeed did stop two live fire situations, just intervened and called it off. Reign of Terror. This was the period from 1973 to 1976, about 30 months. There are, I believe, at this point, 69 recorded deaths. And I believe there were more. There were people who did not have a paper record who disappeared. There were people who did not have social security numbers and were not particularly registered or known. Hundreds were beaten and required medical attention during this time. It was, in our minds, kind of a rolling massacre over that period of following the siege of Windsor.
Excuse me, Paul. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but would you mind speaking a little bit closer to the computer so that we can make sure we hear you? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we want to make sure that everyone hears your story.
Oh, okay.
There we go. Thanks so much.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay. The one of the things that was happening during the Reign of Terror is that the FBI really didn't spend nights on the reservation. They would go to Hot Springs or someplace else. They didn't really live on the reservation, although they were ultimately responsible for law enforcement. Consequently, they used a series of informants, people they paid to inform them about things that were going to happen. Now, this became a little industry on the reservation to become a government informant. But if you are an informant, you have to have some credibility. So something has to happen. So what was happening was informants really didn't intend to harm anybody, but they wanted to make money. So a building would burn down after they had informed the FBI that the aim was going to burn down a building, or it was usually of this level. At the mission school where we worked, I found gasoline, wicks, and combustible materials under the cattle guard, and I believe we were supposed to find it. It was planted there, and the FBI came to us and said, "Your school is going to be firebombed. You have to evacuate." We, of course, said, "No way are we evacuating." But how do you know? Well, we have an informant. He told us. So consequently, we set up defenses. We set up batteries with tripwires. I had an M1 carbine. We would have 4 to 6 hour watches every night. We ran the school, and sure enough, this guy would be on the radio saying, "I'm going to burn the school down," et cetera, tripping into the area. One night, one of the staff members had him on the radio and heard him up on a hill, fired on him, and he was terrified and scared. But what we determined is this guy was an FBI informant. You had this odd situation of a crime wave being paid for by the FBI, the agency supposedly responsible for limiting crime on the reservation. And this is one of the many things that were happening. Of the people who were harmed and hurt on the reservation and killed, the vast majority were associated with AIM, were friends of AIM members. They were in opposition to Dick Wilson and or traditional full-blooded people. The victims of this violence were supposedly the people who were the troublemakers, the terrorists, according to the FBI. And the perpetrators, guardians of our Oglala Nation, usually vigilantes, some of these were members of the police department, and others. How do I know this? Well, they came to my house to recruit me. I'm non-Indian, obviously, but I've been serving on the federal side officially, and I pumped them for as much information as I could get. Well, what are your intentions? What would be, what is the objective of the group? Well, we support law and order, and we want you to be amongst the Vietnam veterans, served with the feds. And well, what is the role of the FBI with you? Well, they know what we're doing. Do they give you physical support? Yes, we get ammunition and some other things. So the relationship did emerge. At that point, I got very angry and said, "Get out of my house right away." The reign of terror caused people to, including us at the mission school, but to center in many people in compounds, as in the Jumping Bull compound. People were there because they were afraid. They were terrified. There were drive-by shootings. People were trying to protect themselves. The FBI were warned, you're going to have your own people killed. They're tactically not doing the right things. You can't just drive around the reservation in your cars and drive into compounds like this. And of course, what happened in the Jumping Bull compound is, I believe, people thought, here we go with another drive-by shooting. These shootings should never have taken place. It was a bad mistake, but people were defending themselves. One of the other things that happened as a result of the reign of terror is that children were exhibiting the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. We would have among teenagers spontaneous crying beginning in the classes. I, at this point, was calling around the country, a National Science Foundation, mental health organization. What do we do? And one of the things that emerged from this is that the experts, the people with the PhDs, had no idea how to treat, what to do with these kids. Our response at the mission school was to go to the parents and grandparents. What do you want us to do? Go into the culture. The school started the Lakota language, Lakota history, Lakota culture program. John attacked him, Cordelia attacked him. We listened to the people, what should have been done years and years before. But the solutions to treating these kids lie within the parents and the grandparents, within the Lakota culture. Within a year or two, we had so many of these kids winning academic awards. Our school grew rapidly compared to the Bureau of Indian Affairs school in Porcupine at that time. Sandra Wounded Foot. I've been asked to speak about this. Sandra was a student of mine. She was 15 years old. She was a fetal alcohol syndrome child. She had very limited capabilities. She was a lovable kid. And she and another girl came to me with a complaint about the federal investigative agent Paul Herman, because he was picking up girls around the reservation to give them rides. I told her and this other girl, don't ever, ever take a ride from Paul Herman then. This doesn't sound right. This absolutely doesn't sound right. But she did. She was found murdered up on I can't remember the hill. Gooseneck Ridge. And then one of the strangest bits of history, Paul Herman and an FBI agent were assigned to be the primary investigations of a murder. I talked with the other FBI agent. He said that when they got up on Gooseneck Ridge, and I'm almost quoting him, Paul, you can call it whatever you like, professional discretion, insight, or divine revelation, but I knew who the murderer was. He was my partner. And he said, I'll prove it. And he did. Sandra Wounded Foot's murderer, however, was only convicted of manslaughter. He served a total of 7 years. By the way, this was aggravated murder. Her body was found with cigarette burns on the upper chest area, a J carved into her chest. She had been tortured, raped, and 2 bullet holes in her head. And what else? Yes. They never were able to convicted of anything more than that. But one of the things that has dealt on our hearts all these years is he was only served 7 years from this terrible, terrible crime. Her murder stunned everyone on the reservation. It was so brutal. I think it was one of the things that started to bring people together in mourning across the political spectrum. It was one of the things that ended the reign of terror in my mind, in our minds, in the memory of this time. Her life had meaning and it had significance. And even after all these years, it's difficult to talk about. One other thing about the reign of terror is that another child who was shot, Delphine Redshirt, she was alive. I remember going to the prayer meetings to that her life would be spared. The bullet was next to her heart. They finally put her from Pine Ridge in a ambulance and drove her 1,000 miles where there was a specialist in Denver, Colorado, who got the bullet. But I remember that night, I I said to Bergie, I was involved with a situation during the war where children were killed. And here, where children are being killed again, they're being shot. What can I do? And she said, you told me you wrote operational reports, several after action reports that went to President Johnson during the war. I said, well, yes, I did. She said, write an operational report to President Ford. And I did, and they showed it to parents the next day, and they were signed all over it. And I asked, you've got to send Indian police from around the country to the reservation to protect the children. Without their families, they can't be they've got to be free of political corruption. The letter got right through to President Ford. Senator Abrask and Representative Abner confirmed the accuracy of the report. And within 5 or 6 days, there were about a dozen Indian police from around the nation who came without their families. These guys were heroes. They were going to protect the children. And I met and talked with 2 of them. And they were, and again, another effort that helped bring the reign of terror to a close. And I'm so glad they were able to come on the record. Leonard's hearing in the year 2000. I was honored to speak at the hearing, and what I did is I spoke of my service with the FBI and the tactical teams, and seeing in one firefight, an FBI agent start screaming in panic. We had to take him out of the area because he was just going through a complete panic. Many of the FBI agents, they thought that they were at war. They're like, this was their Vietnam. Most of them had no military service, and they felt it was like a war. I talked about the drive-by shootings all over the reservation and how people were gathered in many cases in compounds for fear. People were terrified of the jumping bull compound. They were afraid. They were trying to protect themselves. They were gathered for safety. I talked about how the previous 2 other gentlemen had not been convicted because they were defending themselves, and compared the sentencing of Herman and Peltier with these the federal officers that were listening at the hearing, and how unfair this was, and how I felt that Leonard Peltier was not guilty of what he'd been charged with. I did not understand for a long time that this had any impact on them. I felt very, very guilty and felt I had failed Leonard in that hearing, but apparently they were listening to this situation. But having lived through that time, and I think with a lot of other people, the continued incarceration of Leonard Peltier is like an open wound for people who lived through that era. It never heals. It continues to bleed. And it's an open wound in the justice system of America. Having served with the FBI agents, I'm very much aware of the arrogance of the agency, of individual agents, and of the agency itself. It's a cultural failing within the agency. It must be addressed. The freedom, the parole of Leonard Peltier will not only help to heal the wounds in his heart, the wounds in so many other hearts, but it will help heal the Federal Bureau of Investigation. So thank you for letting me share this part of our experience with you.
Thanks a lot, Paul. Paul wrote an excellent book about this experience, and it's called Sandra's Hands. It's an excellent book. So if you'd like to read his entire story, definitely grab a copy. It's available, and it's fantastic. Thanks again, Paul and Kevin Sharp.
Yes, thank you so much. That was really, really devastating to hear, I have to say. And, you know, so as we know, the struggle continues and continues. So we're going to have a little brief musical interlude with Buffy St. Marie singing Sing Our Own Song with some wonderful graphics of current day struggles still going on against these pipelines and everything else that are going through native lands, and the continuing genocide that is constantly going on and has never stopped since the white Europeans arrived on these shores. Yeah, we know Columbus got lost. He didn't know where the hell he was.
Great flood of tears that we've cried for our brothers and sisters that died. Over 500 years has marched away our fears and strengthened our pride. Now we turn back the tide. We will no longer hear your commands. We will slide your control from our lands. Redirect the flame of our anger and pain, and pity the shame for what you do in God's name. And we will stand for the right to be free, and we will rebuild our own society, and we will sing, we will sing, we will sing our own song. When the ancient drum rhythms ring, the voice of our forefathers sings. The will to live will beat on. We will no longer be pawns to greed and to war. We will be idle no more. And we must stand for the right to be free, and we will rebuild a just society, and we will sing, we will sing, we we will be idle no more. And we must stand for the right to be free. And we will rebuild our own society. And we will sing, we will sing, we will sing our own song. And we will teach about the right to be free. And we will rebuild our own society. We will sing, we will sing, we will sing our own song. Oh, dance, dance for the right to be free. We will rebuild our own society. And we will sing, we will sing, we will sing our own song. Abandon we and occupy for the right to be free. And we will rebuild a just society. And we will sing, we will sing, we will sing our own song.
Not yet. Hey, not yet on that song. Thank you. Hello, that's for later. We love it, but that's for later. All right, that was really inspiring, I thought. And it shows how, this struggle continues and continues and continues and never stops. We can go back to, many, many moons ago, and we're still here, and we're still fighting, and we're still alive, and we're still strong, and we still say we are going to win. All right? So I'm going to bring back our friend and wonderful warrior and spirit warrior, Lenny Foster, who is also a person who, as we know, has been doing this pretty much his entire life. And if people don't know what it is that Lenny was doing all those years when he was doing sweats in prisons, sometimes 2 or 3 sweats a day in different prisons, Lenny is one of the people who truly, truly brings light to the darkest places in this planet and in this country, and that is the prisons. So, Lenny Foster, once again. Here, Lenny.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no. Should don't then slinige ki on in slow such on a bushes chen. Tubai da should che and a one either chanel. E got on a hun slow tell to hold yet ado yesana sha. Ado de hen hidini de was almost what you gave and no cleaning. Good ocean art iso de con sad based at Hades. Chennai Leonard Peltier, but I don't let it hold Jesus. It's a zone, but you should get over Hanasti. I don't lay Hawaii outside. So that Leavenworth or Lewisburg, the whole yeah, I come Yahanastaho. Kache Ned England, I don't, and that was said, maybe, Chol on, citizen in England. They chicken long, chinai but the snow. A yota there's a note, you just a note, would ask you ask is a ban hadishne. Ila height of house has seed, and the teacher, but it's not snitched by yesterday. I just want to thank you again here for the opportunity to share my experience and perspective with all that have been said up to now. Some good information from people. It's always enlightening for me to hear people like Kevin Sharp and that gentleman, Paul, sharing that. And I was thinking, it almost made me have a anxiety here, thinking, listening to his story, what being around South Dakota, Pine Ridge and Rosebud, those are, for me, they were dangerous places. And I'm trying to figure out why was that? Because the first time I went up there, I was a college student. I was a student athlete. And I was in my third year of college. I was 21 years old. I went up to Pine Ridge. I knew they were good basketball players. And they introduced me to their sweat lodge. And I also was invited to their Sundance. But also I saw there was a lot of animosity, jealousy that existed among the people, a lot of shame. And that later resulted in the Goon Squad. The Goon Squad were people who did not participate in the 60s, 70s, or 68, 69, 70, 71. They did not participate in these, what I just described, the Sweat Lodge or the Sundance or even Native American Church. And they had a different orientation. And they didn't like people with long hair. They especially didn't like Navajos. I could never figure that out because I was invited to Pine Ridge to witness the Sundance in 1970, in July, August of 1970. And I saw a lot of young people my age that were, I could feel the resentment or the jealousy or they didn't like outsiders, I guess. And I realized that that was not a good place for me to be. But I ended up going up there again many times after that. I met a young woman from Pine Ridge. We ended up together, had a family, and three young adults, Red Dawn, Warlance, and Black Horse. Black Horse has passed away, but Warlance, he turned out to be a professional basketball player. He played college basketball. Red Dawn, our oldest one, is a state senator. So I'm proud of that union that I had with an Oglala woman. And the way I met Leonard Peltier was in Denver, Colorado, 1970 on the streets. And I've told the story many times, but I'm not sure if people listen. But I remember walking down the street on Colfax Avenue in October, November 1970. And I was in my third year of college at Colorado State. And I was playing baseball at the time. So I was down in town. I went to Denver because that's where the Indian community, the Indian Center, and CSU is an all-white school. It's a big school. It's 26,000 students, white students. So it was hard for me to make an adjustment. And so I went to Denver a lot, to the Indian Center for their powwows, their gatherings, and I knew some people that sweat lodges in the area, so I participated with them. And then I met Leonard Peltier, and I think he was traveling through Denver. And I remember we ran into each other on the streets there in the evening, and he asked me if I knew where the AIM office was. I said, yeah, it's right down the street here. So we started talking. I asked him where he was from. He said he was coming from Page, Arizona, where he had worked in a power station. And he asked me where I was from. I told him I was from Fort Defiance, Arizona. He wanted to know what I was doing up there. I said, I'm going to school, CSU. And then he made fun of me because I was a college student. And I guess back in those days, it was not cool to be a college student. It was even Vernon Balcourt, who was the AIM director, he was asking me, what brought you up here to Colorado, to Denver? And I said, well, I'm not in Denver. I'm in Fort Collins. I'm playing baseball. And he said, are you any good? I said, yeah, I'm good. I had a tryout with the Los Angeles Dodgers farm system in July of 1966. And then he says, how did you manage that? And I said, I was good enough that a scout got a hold of my father. My father told me, and he took me to Albuquerque for a tryout camp. And I did well. The scout that talked to me, and I was entering my senior year, 1967. And he said, you keep working on your game, there's a possibility we could end up drafting you. And but I was on the short side, I was on the small side. So I knew that that I wasn't a power hitter, more of a contact hitter. So I knew I had some potential, and I could run fast, I could throw, I could feel, and I was a contact hitter. I was a switch hitter, so that made a plus for me. And the scout that wrote me a letter, his name was John Keenan. But I looked him up and Googled him, and he had passed away, but he became one of the more prominent scouts in their system in later years. And so that was my high school. And then my father used to take us out because he was a Navajo code talker, United States Marines during World War II. So he taught us how to shoot a rifle. We had a big 30-06 rifle. And that rifle had a kick. So he'd line us up, I had three brothers besides. There was four boys and one girl in our family. But the brothers or the boys, he would line us up one at a time, shoot that rifle. And he taught us well how to shoot that. Later, that came into use, or the ability to use a rifle at Cass Lake, Minnesota. That was in 1972. The American Indian Movement was called to Cass Lake, Minnesota to enforce the hunting and fishing rights. And that was in the spring of 1972, which actually was after Raymond Yellow Thunder. And I went to Gordon, Nebraska with Vernon Balcourt and the group from Denver. And I seen over 1,000 Indians protesting, demonstrating. And I was really amazed by all of that. And I think I did try to recall if I ran into Leonard Peltier again. But I remember there was all kinds of people, and I was impressed by Dennis Banks and Russell Means and Clyde Balcourt, people like that, Leonard Crowdog, Wallace Blackout. These are legendary figures in the movement. And I got acquainted with Leonard Peltier, like I said. And again, I ran into him over at Cass Lake, Minnesota. He was with Milwaukee AIM, and he was the security chief for that group. And I was with Denver AIM. You know, I didn't take it serious. And but later I realized that the Indian rights is very serious business. And especially after Wounded Knee, you couldn't go into Pine Ridge or up in that area alone. And I made the mistake of going from Rosebud to Pine Ridge to White. I made a stop in White Clay on my way to Rapid City. That was a big mistake that I made. It almost cost me my life because I ran into the goons. They didn't know me. I didn't know them either. I had long hair and they had long hair, and they were drunk Indians. They wanted to fight with me. They grabbed me by my hair. I had to fight my way out of that. I ran to my car and got my M1 carbine and shot off a round, took off. They called the cops on me. And then I got arrested right there in Pine Ridge. They took all my stuff. And I gave the keys to a friend that was in the car with us. So they didn't confiscate the car, but they confiscated my stuff. And then when I spent a night in jail, and the next morning, the judge asked me where I was from. I said, I'm from Fort Defiance, Arizona. What the hell are you doing here? Are you one of those Ames? I said, no, I'm just on my way to Rosebud or Pine Ridge. So he gave me 1 hour. Actually, it was a woman. She gave me 1 hour to get out of town. So I went to some friends, bear runners. They lived right there in Pine Ridge, and they gave me a ride to Porcupine. From Porcupine, I caught a ride back to Denver. And I said, I'm not going back there anymore. But I ended up going back one more time after that. And that was another incident where these people tried to run me off the road. There, I shot off some rounds right at them. And they got scared and they took off and we left. And it just made me think about what Mr. Berg was talking about, all that was going on. That was right after the Reign of Terror or right during the Reign of Terror. And I told myself that you got no business being up there. Yeah, you're a wounded knee vet. I survived 11 firefights. I almost got shot and killed one of the, I think it was the very second time we had a firefight. I almost got hit in the head of myself, Percy Casper, a Shuswap Indian from Canada, and myself were the only ones in the bunker. And it started early in the morning. Boy, they didn't let up because they had all the firepower. The feds, the federal marshals, the FBI. I think they relished it. They really thought that they could do that and just sit back, eat their steaks, and they had unlimited ammunition. So they could shoot, as much as they want. But really, when it came down to a fight, they were scared. They were scared of what the Indian boys, because we had faith, and we had our beliefs, and we had our spirituality, and we had our pipe. And that's what they were afraid of. We had that spiritual base. And one thing I learned about the Lakotas is they're not afraid. They're not scared. They're actually very strong, not afraid, very brave, courageous people. And I'm honored to be an in-law to the Lakotas. And now I can go among them, do the sweat lodge ceremony, go sit in a teepee and eat medicine all night in Native American church ceremonies. I've Sundance with them for 26 years and dragged the skull. That's hard. That's a hard way of life to do that, to live like that. Abstain from alcohol and drugs and those beliefs and those teachings I gave to my kids and my grandkids. And I think about that how this movement that began in Minnesota in 1968 went into the Dakotas, North Dakota, South Dakota, fighting for their rights. The Lakotas are fighting for their Black Hills, and who Leonard Peltier was. Some people look at him as an icon. I look at him as a big brother, bro. And he was always really glad to see me. Now, how did I get involved with him? Because I met him in the streets of Denver, and then he was at Cass Lake and BI takeover. He wasn't a Wounded Knee, but I kept running into him. And then I heard he was involved in that shootout. June 25th. So I reached out to him and he asked me to come in, but he was in Marion, USP, Marion, Illinois. And he asked me to come there and build a sweat lodge because we sundanced together at Rosebud, South Dakota, 1975, right after the shootout. So he knew I knew the sweat lodge ceremony. He knew that I knew the songs, the prayers. I can speak my language. So he reached out to me and wanted me to come in to build a sweat. But the warden and the chaplain said no. And that's at USP Marion. That was a supermax facility. They weren't letting anybody in. So then I was going into Leavenworth, Springfield, Missouri, El Reno, Oklahoma, Inglewood, Colorado, Safford, Arizona, Tucson, Phoenix, Lompoc, San Quentin, Santa Fe, Florence, Canyon City, places like that. Some of these are hard prisons. Santa Fe, Canyon City, they're tough prisons. They're run by the inmates. So you always have to watch yourself. So when I heard that he was over and I went to Springfield, and Chaplain Richter, that was very unusual because he asked me if I was interested in seeing Leonard Peltier. I didn't ask him. I had intentions to do because Springfield's not that far. It's like 2 hours from Leavenworth. He said he was transferred to Leavenworth, and I'm sure he'd like to see you for a sweat and a pipe ceremony. So I said, yeah, can you get me in there? He said, I'll call the chaplain and then make a referral. So I ended up going to Leavenworth, USP Leavenworth, the big house. That's what they call it, the big house. It's an old prison with walls. You can't see out. And, Leonard was there for the next 20 years. I visited him 3 times a year, the spring, the summer, and the fall. Then at times I went to Martin Luther King holiday. A black church would bring me in. And then I would go see Leonard and do a sweat in the snow in January. So we did that. That's the kind of relationship we had. And, you know, he's a good, he has a lot of humor. He's got good Indian humor. And he's always talking about things that are in the news. And he really thought that Obama was going to release him. I thought so too. And he's well-read. He's a very extraordinary painter. I've seen some of his artwork up there in the second floor of the prison. He's allowed a space where he can paint. And the inmates, they respect him for that because he's not a jive. He's the real McCoy. He can paint. Most Indians can paint and draw, but he's one of a kind. And I asked him, where'd you learn that? He just said, I just learned it by drawing. And now he's got paintings that are in the hands of some movie stars and people like that. And you know, he always looks forward to the time that we would do a good sweat, and he'd invite other political prisoners, or Cubans, and Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, even this white guy named Tom Manning. He passed away, but this guy was he was one of those SDS political revolutionaries. And they're all confined, and they were in Leavenworth. So he introduced me to all these people. Now over 20 years. I'd go in there, spend 4 or 5 hours to have a good sweat. He likes to sweat. He likes to pray. And learn the songs, learn the prayers. And the one thing about the Lakota, they can sing. Why they can sing? They know those songs. Get that sweat lodge going and say, okay, who wants to sing? You start us out, 4 songs. Then after that, the next one. Oh, you kept making offerings of water and the cedar and singing and singing. And finally we had to take a break to let some fresh air into it. We did that from about 11 o'clock till 2 o'clock. Then we finish up. Those guys can cook too. Make fried bread. Oh, we have a big meal. You know, the chaplains, some of them, they didn't like that. They didn't like the Indian boys to have the initiative. They want to keep them down. They always try to make it difficult for them and say you can't cook and all that. And it was in the rules and the regulations that they are allowed to cook, to have a meal after the sweat. That's done. That's customary. So fried bread and ramen noodles, some chili, and, you know, they know how to fix it up. We have a big meal. So we spent that time together like that, and he always looked forward to it. That's how I became real good friends with him. That finally came back to work against me when I wanted to do the sweat at Coleman, Florida. The warden called me. It's very rare that a warden will call you your office. I had an office there in Winter Rock, Arizona, the Tribal Department of Behavioral Health. I was the director, program supervisor of the Navajo Nation Corrections Project. Only one of its kind in the whole United States, an Indian funded program dealing directly with the incarceration of its citizens in state prisons and federal penitentiaries. And then families would come in seeking advice and maybe parole and helping with their situation. They have a son or a relative in prison. So I was able to do that. And I worked with death row inmates. I witnessed five executions. And that's difficult. Talk about PTSD. That you don't want to dream about that. And sometimes I can't sleep late at night. I had to get up and burn some sage and maybe turn on the TV, sit there by myself thinking about Leonard Peltier and just like what Kevin Sharp was talking about. You don't want to hear something happened to Leonard Peltier. I feel the same way sometimes, and it bothers me. But that's the order of business that I chose. So I got to live with it. And so these are some of my experiences with for 37 years working with the prisons, fighting for religious freedom of Native American inmates. The main struggle was to get the sweat lodges into the prisons, the pipes, the tobacco. It's a big issue. It's a big issue. They don't want tobacco in there, so we had to get traditional tobacco, kaniknik or tzatnatpo, our own form of herbs. And then also to have pipes. Sometimes Orville Looking Horse, he doesn't want pipes brought into the prisons. But if you don't go into the prisons, you can't be saying things like that. You got to go in and visit with the boys, sit in the sweat with them and pray with them, and not make these orders, blank orders, and say you can't do that. Same way with the sweat lodges. I'll give you a good example. Utah Department of Corrections, Draper, Utah, 1985. the Indian boys there wrote me a letter in Window Rock. I opened it, I read it, and they wanted a sweat lodge constructed right there in the premises. So I called the chaplain, the warden, who asked for a meeting to discuss this. So they were willing to do that. And then I went to meet with them, and then I guess in the meantime, they must have got a hold of their church leaders, the governor, and all those people. They're all LDS Mormons. They don't want that. They don't want Indians to be traditional. They want you to cut your hair, burn your sweat lodge, burn your medicine bundle, pick up the Book of Mormon. And so when I met with them, they already had their mind made up. And so I figured, well, I didn't see what the harm was. Well, what's the harm here? Oh, they made all kinds of excuses that we're going to tunnel out, that we can tunnel out of the sweat lodge. I told them one time, I said, that's absurd and ridiculous. How are you going to do that? You need a backhoe, maybe a week or 2 weeks, a month to make a tunnel to get out. So how are you going to do that with your fingers? And they couldn't say anything, but that was their reason of why they denied the sweat lodge to be constructed. So, okay, so we contacted the state legislature that was friends with the Indian right there from Go Shoot. I found an attorney at Chicano, Danny Quintana, right there, and he practiced in Salt Lake City. And he said, yeah, I'll file a lawsuit. I got a hold of my friend, Walter Echohawk, the Native American Rights Fund in Boulder. I said, well, you're taking on the church. I said, that's all right. We can do it. We have belief. We have faith. We have the pipe. All they have is their Bible or their book. Let's go at it. For 3 years, it took us in federal court. We won it. Judge Green ruled in our favor in March 1989. He said that Utah Department of Corrections, Draper, Utah, is obligated to allow the Indians to build a sweat lodge for their spiritual ceremonial practices. That program still exists today, but it's funny when I heard them say they were going to tunnel out, and that we're going to sneak out and tunnel our way out of there, or throw the blankets on the fence and climb over the fence or the walls. You know, I heard the same thing in San Quentin, California. Every now and then I ran into people, they were completely absurd. These are supposed to be intelligent people. And yet they make those kinds of claims. Oh, we're going to burn down their sweat lodge, Santa Fe, New Mexico. We're going to use that fire and burn down their prison. And I told that warden one time, I said, how can you make a brick burn? Is there a way you can do that? Your prison's made out of brick and mortar. It's not made out of wood. And you're saying that we're going to burn it down or we're going to tunnel our way out of here? Come on now. Let's be reasonable adults and be rational here. And then I took that into the state legislature, figured, well, we can solidify the policies of the statute by introducing state legislation and get it introduced through the state legislature, and then they'll pass it, and then the governor will sign it into law. And then this one, the Mexican-American state senator from Las Cruces, he says to me, in the hearing, right there at the Capitol, he says, what makes you guys think you're so special? I said, you guys, what are you talking about? Who's you guys? Who are you talking about? You talking about me? I'm a citizen of the Navajo Nation. I'm here as a sovereign entity of the nation. representing my people in the state legislature to deal with the governor. And we remind you that our people sign contracts with your government. They're called treaties. They still exist today. That's all we're asking you to honor that, recognize that. He didn't know how to respond. And the governor, Bruce King, he signed it into state law. So I've had dealings with Bruce Babbitt in Arizona, the Colorado Governor Roy Romer, Utah Mike Levitt, New Mexico Bruce King, Tony Anaya. So I've had dealings with the legislatures fighting for religious rights, religious freedom for Native Americans in the prison system. And Leonard has he's a beneficiary of all that. He brings attention to some of the places where they were having problems. Longpok, Lewisburg, they don't like him for that. They try to shame him. When I go see him, we'd be walking and the guards would start yelling, say things. And I was watching the reaction of the inmates, how they react when the guard starts saying things to them, shaming them, saying things. And I've seen the Indian boys kind of put their heads down a little bit. They don't. And I thought to myself, damn, this is not good, you know, to have the prisons. You took away his freedom, lock him up, but now you can't even allow him any dignity at the sweat lodge ceremony. And then that chaplain, he wanted to come in, and they told him, the Indian boys told him, if you go in there, you can't run out. If it gets too hot, you can't just be crawling out. So he had second thoughts. He didn't come into the sweat lodge ceremony. But they want to know what is it we're talking about. You pray and sing. And it's very confidential, it's very intimate, it's very sacred. And I'm sure it's the same way with a Catholic priest. When their parishioner goes in and make a confession, the cops won't come over there and say, what did they say? What do you guys talk about? You know, they think just because we're Indians, they can do that. I even went to a United States Senate on Indian Affairs Committee, a congressional hearing. Senator Dan Inouye was the chairman of the Senate Indian Affairs Committee, the United States Congress, 1992, 1994. That's when Senator McCain was on there. And he tried to jump bad with me about his being a prisoner of war. He didn't have access to any of that. I said, well, you over there, you invaded some other people's country. Of course they're gonna, lock you up and not allow you that right. You didn't have any treaty with them. It was a Vietnamese people. And he didn't like me for that. I saw him one more time after that before he passed away in Phoenix, Arizona, at the convention center. He remembered me. I talked to him, and I asked him for his support on releasing Leonard Peltier and Peter McDonald. And I heard that he made a vote that he voted for Peter McDonald. He didn't vote for Leonard Peltier. You can look that up. And now that was we had given him that kind of authority, but he didn't deserve it because he was a custer. He was a Kit Carson. You don't negotiate with these kinds of people for religious freedom for our beliefs. They don't believe in it. They wanted to take those things away. So I mean, that was my orientation. A long ways from the time when My dad took me to Albuquerque, New Mexico. I put on my uniform, went out there, put my name on the registration. You had to put down your height and weight, your which hand you throw with. I was a switch hitter. I taught myself how to switch hit. So that was a plus for me, outfield. And, they time you with a stopwatch, see how fast you run 40 yards. If you can run fast, it's good. If you can throw, it's even better. If you can feel, you're a prospect. So I was able to do well in all of that. I hit my only time at bat, I had a hit. I figured that pitcher, he's a big white boy, 6'5", throwing 95 miles an hour. I figured in my mind, this guy's going to throw fast. His first pitch is going to be a fastball. And he's going to throw right down the middle or towards the inside. I just got to jump on it. Because after that, he's not going to throw like that. So I jumped on that first pitch that he threw and I hit it. And that was a plus right there. And I got a good review on that. So by doing all that, what I went through, then for 2 years, then I heard in 1968, American Indian movement was formed, and I wanted to meet some of these people. First opportunity I had in Denver, Colorado, Vernon Belcourt. I wanted to meet him, and he introduced me to Clyde Belcourt, Dennis Banks, Russell Means. They were very extraordinary, intimidating, because they knew what they were talking about, and they already had long hair. They were wearing chokers, braids, beads and braids. So I said, well, maybe I should dress like them too, get a Levi jacket, put a red headband on, grow my hair long. So I did that, wear dingo boots. So that I still laugh about that. I have a picture where I'm sitting and wearing dingo boots. That was the uniform for American Indian movement. And it was a good life. Like I said, it was very serious. Indian rights is a very serious business. It's not something that to play with, or the livelihood of people who depend on water, depend on different crops that grow in their area, whether it's corn, wild rice, or animal, buffalo, things like that. Water is very important. Right here in Arizona, the state of Arizona, the state of California, Nevada, even Mexico, they want Indian water. They want our Indian water, Indian rights, Indian water rights. So it's going to come down to that. And Leonard Peltier represents all of that. He represents that ascension for liberation and freedom, sovereignty. And we need to continue to work on his behalf, do what we can, pray. I told my friend Tony, I said, bring out that pipe. You Sundance with a pipe for a reason. Bring it out. Clean that bowl. Get your tobacco and put it in there and pray with it. Sing a song for Leonard Peltier and ask the spirits to release him. Those spirits are listening to you. Do that. We did all that. Pray for Kevin Sharp, and that will happen. Make that all happen. And the people that are at this event here, that's what I think of all of you people. You're really somebody that's doing a outstanding job, outstanding standing up against Goliath, standing up against it's hard. I grew up in a sheep camp. I don't live like that anymore because that way of life is slowly disappearing. It was a horse-drawn wagon with a big water tank in the back of this wagon, made my grandpa. Them days are gone. It's only in memory now. But that's what I did. I tried to have them with these little dog puppies as pets. See, they're not pets. They're work dogs. They herd the sheep. They look out after the coyote. They look after the wolves. They can attack. They live with they sleep in the corral with the sheep. Well, I learned something there. When 4 or 5 years old, I was doing that. I would think about that sometimes. And I'm thinking about some of that when Paul was talking about the experience there in Pine Ridge, especially when the goons were, the funny thing about the goons, I knew some of them. They were basketball players. If you know about Pine Ridge or Rosebud High School, they have some of the best high school players, basketball players, and they form adult teams, AAU, and they travel the country. There's all Indian tournaments, and every reservation has their top players. They form a team, and I encourage both of my sons to play basketball and baseball when they were grade school, junior high, in Warlands. He went to play college basketball. He tried out with the Denver Nuggets, professional basketball, 2002. Kiki Vanderway, that was the general manager. And I said, what did he say to you? And he just said, well, he told me that to keep trying. He went to Europe and played 2 years there. So that's all the experience. And I attribute some of that to just being around people like Leonard Peltier and others like yourselves. So I want to thank you again.
I want to thank you.
I appreciate it very much. I didn't mean to get emotional, but
It's
some
okay.
of this moves me. So thank you.
Thank you, Lenny. And free Leonard Peltier.
Oh,
Oh. I have a friend here, Ori Lumumba, who is a fellow. We call ourselves the dynamic duo. So anyway, a lot of people have done time with Leonard over the years, and we have a brother whose name is Eddie Africa, who did time with Leonard in Leavenworth, another innocent person who is now also home. So Ori, if you would come up to introduce Eddie, that would be great. And yes, please bring Amari with you. Now you're going to come up here, Amari. On the move. On the move, Amari. On the move.
He's not all that shy. Don't mind him. But on the move, everybody. My brother Eddie is gonna come up and he's gonna speak in a minute. But we just want, as we talk about Leonard, in 1989, after the riots in Camp Hill Prison in Pennsylvania, some of the movement were there at that prison, and they were taken. They weren't involved in the riots, but they were taken out and they were shipped out. They were seen as troublemakers who helped incite it, and okay, and they see he had a lot to say, and they were sent out. They were sent to Leavenworth Prison in Kansas. Phil was sent there. Our brother Eddie was sent there. Okay, he wants me to do it, and they were sent there. And upon getting there, Phil and Eddie getting there, Leonard was one of the political prisoners that they met. Leonard had shown Phil and Eddie his artwork. he introduced them around a political scene there at the prison. They was greeted by several political prisoners on the move. They was greeted by several political prisoners. In a minute, baby. They met people like, he wants me to say bye on it. You're gonna say bye in a minute. They met people like Sundiata Kohli, Jan Laman, Larry Giddens, other political prisoners. You know, Eddie talks about how Phil got to participate in the sweat lodge with Leonard. Eddie was in the hole at the time. Like I said, our brother, I am, baby. Our brother did 41 years in prison. He's home now. He's still fighting. And we got to do everything to bring Leonard home, to bring Mumia home, to bring all the political prisoners home. So we're going to let y'all set this up. We're going to have Eddie come on. And Amari wants to end this.
Vai, seu!
Okay, baby.
Hey,
On the move.
On the move, Eddie.
How you doing?
On the move, man.
On the move, on the move.
On the move.
On the move, everybody.
Great to see you all.
On the move. City, Africa. And this is dedicated to Leonard Peltier, Anime Squash, and all the indigenous brothers and sisters. On the move. System people are celebrating Christopher Columbus as the person who they say discovered America, ignoring the native people who were already here all across this country before any of the others came here. Columbus came here for one reason, to steal the resources of this country. And when any of the native people here resisted the plundering of their land, they were abused, murdered, eliminated by Columbus. This same attitude exists today towards Native Americans. They are still victims of the system Columbus represented. This false credit giving Columbus was done solely because Columbus represented the white culture out of Europe, who convinced themselves that they were superior. And based on this lie, were justified by calling the people here savages, inferior, unimportant. Today, the same attitude exists toward the descendants of the original people of this country. Leonard Peltier, a descendant of the victims of Columbus, is also being abused, oppressed, denied his freedom because he resisted being a victim and spoke out against the enslaving culture brought here by Columbus and made the law of the land. To quote John Africa, quote, "The measure of law is truly determined by the things in existence that are assured and trusting." End quote. Long live John Africa. There's nothing assuring and trusting in the system of racism, class, and sexism. This system is the rich against the poor, divided by so-called color. People have been duped into accepting the lies like Columbus discovering this country as truthful, innocent, factual. But Moves coordinator John Africa is not fooled. To quote John Africa, quote, "An innocent mask will fool only the blind, but the man that can see will cut through all disguises." End quote. Long live John Africa. Free Leonard Peltier and all political prisoners. On the move. Long live John Africa.
long live John.
Long live John. On the move. Like Ann was saying, Eddie and Phil did 41 years in prison, as did me and Janet. And my brother Carlos didn't do 41 years, but he was in prison also unjustly. So we know how it feels. We know what Leonard is facing, and we are just as determined to help free him as everybody was to help free the Move 9. So just because we are now out, we are not complacent with the situation that's still at hand. We're not going to rest until all political prisoners are free and be able to live out what's left of their lives just like we are. So all we could tell people is don't think that it's hopeless. They got to move 9 out of prison. We can get Leonard, Mumia, and all the rest of the political prisoners out also. On the move.
On the move.
On the move.
We are an example. We are an example, y'all, and it can be done. Never give up. Never stop fighting.
Oh,
They told us we were never going to get out of prison. We spent 41 years in prison, and they tried to keep us in there. It's the same thing they're trying to do with Leonard Peltier. And people have to keep fighting and don't give up. Don't stop fighting and move. It's an example of the power of the people that fight to free political prisoners.
You know, they're targeting Leonard, Sundiata Akola. They've targeted our brother Delbert, our brother Phil, because these people are seen as icons, as a beacon of hope in this struggle. And they want to discourage that. They want to make people feel like there is no hope. And that's all this is about. But people can't be fooled by that. There is hope. The fight that we, political prisoners, revolutionaries, have set forth is unending. As John Africa said, the seed of revolution has been planted and this system cannot stop it. So we have to keep that in mind and don't get hopeless. We have to keep that fight because it's just a false mask. They just want to fool people and discourage people. But the fight that everybody is doing is very well being effective and it's felt because, like Janice said, if it wasn't, we wouldn't be here today. So don't give up. And we're saying free all political prisoners. Free Leonard Peltier.
Free them all.
Free them all. Thank you so, so much. Really appreciate it. And it's great to see all of you. I miss you guys.
We miss you too. And thank you to everybody that has been helping political prisoners throughout all of these years.
Yeah, yeah.
One thing people should keep in mind, Leonard Peltier's enemy is our enemy also.
That's right.
You know what I mean? So when you fight for him, you fighting for yourself.
That's right.
You keep that in
Absolutely.
mind. That'll keep you motivated.
That's right.
Because if you don't help him, then you can't complain when they come for you.
That's right. Thank you so, so much.
All right now. On the move, everybody.
I will see you soon. We'll be down there for Mumia on the 19th. So hopefully we'll see you there. All right.
All right.
Okay?
All right. Free them all.
Free them all.
Okay, speaking of October 19th, before we end, our brother Gil is here. He's helping to organize transportation down to Philadelphia on October 19th. There's going to be a hearing for Mumia to decide whether or not we can see the evidence in those 6 boxes, right? So Gil has been organizing bus. There's another bus also going from Newark, very important. You know, Mumia, like Leonard, is totally innocent. Everybody knows he didn't commit that crime. So we really need to bring him home as well. So thank you, Gil.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm here to talk about, as they said, about the court date for Mumia Abu-Jamal. So Mumia Abu-Jamal, who is he? He grew up Wesley Cook in the projects in West Philly. And when he was still in high school, the Black Panther Party recognized his talent in journalism, and they recruited him for the Black Panther newspaper. When Chairman Fred Hampton was assassinated in Chicago by the Chicago police for feeding children, they flew him out there. He was the 3rd person in Fred Hampton's apartment, and of course the FBI opened a file on Mumia Abu-Jamal at that point. He went on to study journalism in college and ended up a reporter in Philadelphia on NPR, which made him an even bigger target for the FBI and the Philadelphia police, and he was reporting on police corruption, the incarceration of just people in the community, but also in particular, the viciousness around the Move family. So Philadelphia, there are very few things that radicals and liberals agree on, but the radical view of Philadelphia is that it's a colonial occupation, much like the occupation we've been talking about this afternoon. The liberal approach is more that the police are basically engaged in a racist oppression of worker movements and in particular the Black community in Philadelphia. But regardless of that, in 1981, there was an incident on the streets on Locust Street in Philadelphia, December 1981. Both Daniel Faulkner, a police officer, and Mumia Abu-Jamal were shot at that incident. And the police, of course, recognized an opportunity to frame Mumia for the murder of Daniel Faulkner. Just as in Leonard Peltier's case, there's suppressed evidence. And a couple of years ago, a liberal DA was elected in Philadelphia, Larry Krasner. We were pursuing at that time an appeal in his case based upon Ronald Castiles, who was a former prosecutor, but also ended up hearing the appeals on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and there was a conflict of interest there. But during those hearings, during that appeal, Larry Krasner's done some good things, as liberals are wont to do. He's done some good things for people in the Black community, who were framed and by Philadelphia police as part of the Innocence Project and things like that. But it hasn't been as helpful with political prisoners. And but in this case, he actually did the right thing, which is release coming up on 3 years now ago, 6 boxes of suppressed evidence, exculpatory evidence in Mumia's case that had been hidden. This is not what's supposed to happen. What's supposed to happen in Mumia's original trial was that all the evidence is shared between the prosecution and the defense, and then they argue about who's guilty and what the remedies are. But that's not what happened. These 6 boxes, it's really of 32. I mean, we strongly believe there are 32 boxes of exculpatory evidence, so where are the other 26? But there's also a very kind of insane rule in Pennsylvania. You can only have 1 appeal at a time. So basically they delayed. They were never gonna hold, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court was never gonna hold one of its own accountable. But they basically delayed the case so that we couldn't start this one. But now that's over, and the second hearing in the case based upon the new evidence is coming up October 19th. As mentioned, we're gonna have a bus from Union Square leaving at 6 a.m. And there's a POP, the People's Organization for Progress in Newark, is having a bus leave from Newark. So we're all going down there. I have bus tickets, but you can also go online to freemumia.com or to the website for Jericho Movement or for the campaign to bring Mumia home. We're all working together under this new campaign called Love Not Fear to support Mumia's release. By the way, I mentioned liberals. The Amnesty International agrees that that Mumia should have a new case or be released upon appeal. So there's some agreement, and we hope this new evidence will lead to his release. And we need your support to pack the courtroom and outside the courtroom. So please come see me at the table, or go to one of those websites. You can buy tickets online for the bus as well. So we're trying to make it as easy for people to get down there. Folks, we can get you in touch with the People's Organization for Progress if you want to leave from Newark. So thank you for your support. Free Mumia, free Leonard, free them all.
All right, so I am going to ask my dear friend and comrade Benjamin Ramos from the ProLibertad Freedom Campaign and New York City Jericho and Call to Action on Puerto Rico, et cetera, to come up and say a few words, talk about one of our comrades, dear friend that we lost very recently and that we are all still mourning for, which is Frankie Vergara, also known as Don Francisco Vergara Valentin, as I always called him. Anyway, Ben, floor is yours.
All right, when I say free them, you say all. Free them. Free them. Free them. I'm going to do two quick announcements, brothers and sisters. First is a call to action. 3 weeks from today, there is going to be a march at Times Square at 12 o'clock for Cuba to end the inhuman, illegal blockade that exists in Cuba. We want folks, there are flyers on your chairs. Please make sure you take one. We would love to see you at Times Square, 12 o'clock. Cuba has been a sister nation to many of our movements and many of our nations. It's time we went out there and supported Cuba, especially since the international annual vote at the United Nations is coming up in the beginning of November. So that's the call to action. The second is, unfortunately, an unhappy, a very tragic piece of news. Francisco Vergara, who was the national co-chair of national co-chair of Jericho and one of the founders of the ProLibertad Freedom Campaign, passed on Thursday, August 25th. A day after his 73rd birthday. And for those of you who don't know Frankie dedicated the last 50 years of his life to 4 causes: the independence of Puerto Rico, nuestra nación Puerto Rico, who has been a colony of the United States for 124 years. He fought for the establishment of revolutionary socialism around the world. He was an internationalist with a strong focus on supporting revolutions, especially in Cuba and Vietnam. And he was a staunch supporter of the freedom of all U.S.-held political prisoners. Frankie started his political career in the 1970s as a 20-something-year-old here in New York City, working to free the 5 nacionalistas, the 5 Puerto Rican nationalists that were in jail during the 1970s. So from the 1970s to when he passed on this year, Frankie dedicated his life to revolution, justice, and freedom. And I want everyone to keep the dates February 4th or February 11th, either the first or second Saturday of February. Please keep them open in the early afternoon. We will be celebrating a revolutionary political tribute to Frank and his life and his legacy. Jericho, ProLibertad, and several other organizations have come together to create this tribute for him. We're not going to be mourning his life. We're going to be celebrating the revolutionary that he was. So when I say free them, you say all. Free them, free them, free them. Frank Vergara presente.
All right, so in the usual fashion, when we end these events, we end with the American Indian Movement song. So I would ask people to stand for the AIM song, and the brother will start playing it now.
Yeah!
Right. Hey, I love this T-shirt. We demand free Danziger. Yeah, he's cool too. He did a lot of work there in Ecuador, and then they threw him in prison. All right, yeah, justicia para Ecuador. Gente indígena de todas las Américas. Ya bueno.